Hello! Welcome to another Starfinder Wednesday. Hey, you know who I am. I'm Jason Keeley, the Starfinder developer. With me today is Liz Liddell.
Hi, Jason.
Hi! A newly minted designer. Yes.
I am, as of last week.
As of last week. That's very exciting, and we all, couldn't be happier here in the office, I'm sure.
Thanks. It's been really exciting.
When I started working here as an editor, a couple years ago, the name Liz Liddell was the go-to freelance editor that everyone was like, oh, just, if Liz can do it, give it to Liz. And one of the earlier things, not the first thing I did, but one of the earliest things I did was sort of taking something you had edited and just basically in Word embedding your changes through so that we could propagate them onto the next phase of whatever the editing was.
Right.
And from there, you just kind of kept coming back and showing up,
you can't get rid of me.
becoming basically an off-site contract editor.
Yep.
And then we finally got you to move here.
Yeah, finally. It took you threatening to fire me to do it.
Well, not me. Not me.
Not you personally.
I had nothing to do with it. I had moved on to Starfinder at that point. And as a matter of fact, you are essentially your first author's credit was with Starfinder.
That's right. I've done a lot of writing, but my first writing was for Starfinder.
Yeah, you worked on Pact Worlds. Both of our gas giants, I believe.
Liavara and Brethida.
Yes. I think we had Joe come in and talk a little bit about Liavara in one of our earlier Starfinder streams, so go back and check that out if you want to learn more about Liavara. And there might be more about Brethida in the future. Who knows? And who did I get to write about that kind of stuff? I wonder who it could have been. Actually, it came that you did a terrific, awesome Stewards cosplay at a Gen Con. I think, was it the first?
It was the first day Starfinder was out, yes.
And it was just so amazing that I was like, I'm going to, later on, and when I had to have an article about the Stewards for Against the Ion Throne, I was like, Liz, you like the Stewards, right? You don't just want to dress up like them. You want to write about them, right?
Well, I will tell you that costume got chosen because it was probably the easiest one I could make in like a 10-day span leading up to that Gen Con, but
you did a great job.
It was a lot of fun. I'm glad I did it.
And from there, eventually chose you to write some Attack of the Swarm.
That's right.
And that's what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking about Liz's adventure, Huskworld, which you can see at the very top of right here. I kind of was one of my earlier picks for authors, and I was like, which one of these looks like fun to you?
Oh, and I was like, there is a planet that's been completely devoured and destroyed by this voracious alien insect army, and I get to write about it. Yeah.
Huskworld is basically, as it's the third volume, we go behind enemy lines, so to speak. The PCs have sort of faced the swarm on their home planet, been driven off, and then having to deal on a colony planet with some of the refugees and that sort of side of war. And from there, I wanted to go on, hey, look, you need a plan to fight back against the swarm. What's it going to be? The PCs get some information at the end of the second adventure, The Last Refuge, and from there they're like, oh, we have a lead. Let's follow it up. But unfortunately, the lead they have to follow up, it takes place on the planet of Ilim Chuva, which has already been eaten up by the swarm. The same exact swarm subcolony that attacked Suskalon. So it's very interesting what's going on there.
Yeah,
I'm just going to point out from there here that there's going to be spoilers about this adventure. So if you're planning on playing it and don't want to be spoiled about it, or just like to read this for your own, keep watching the stream, but mute it, and we'll just talk, and you can see some of the cool art and some of the cool maps and stuff like that. So this one here, I want to talk real quick and just general about the title. In terms of Pathfinder Adventure Path Adventures and Starfinder Adventure Path Adventures, we didn't do much in the way of one word titles.
It's very rare.
It's very rare. It didn't happen until War for the Crown's Crownfall, their first adventure. And the only other one that I could see, as I checked it out earlier, was Rune Plague, which is after that in Return of the Rune Lords. And it's just something so simple, right? You get a nice, clean sort of title. We usually do the this of that, or something is doing this, or, an evocative. They're all very evocative, but I just thought, like, I wanted to do something kind of like, this is what this, just bam, hit it. And
this is it.
This is it. And with Starfinder, we use the word world, right? Yeah, because it's
in space. There's worlds.
And I was just sort of riffing on like what a world that's been eaten. Oh, it's probably just a husk of a thing. So this one is a husk of a world, and why not? Why call it husk of a world and just call it Huskworld? And it just it has that sort of real sci-fi feel.
Yeah, and that really spoke to me when I was looking through and the arc of the adventure and what the volumes were going to be about is that it's the name itself is very evocative, and just the little bit of sentence that Jason gave about what is this adventure and what's going on with this destroyed world was immediately I saw this devastated plain that's just dusty and cracked and broken open and nothing left on it at all, and it was just I've got like hair on my arms standing up. It was just such a really, really evocative idea that I was just said this is what I've got to work on. This is the one that's calling to me.
It's a real specific kind of apocalypse that we're dealing with, because the swarm come in and they just consume everything, and they get all the resources they want to make themselves more and more, and then just move on, leaving nothing behind.
Yeah, so all animals, all plants, and then into things like water, elemental minerals, rare earth minerals, even to some degree like the actual heat out of the core of the planet.
It's awful. It's not that I think about.
We've made some real villains here.
Oh God, yeah. Well, we want to be able to like be fine with murdering thousands of them, because there are a lot of them out there. So I think I haven't quite fully decided if Huskworld or the Forever Reliquary is my favorite title on Attack of the Swarm, but the Forever Reliquary sounds like a Doctor Who episode so much that I just can't. I just love it, and I don't know why. It has. We'll get to that. Maybe we'll see about it later. I don't know. I could talk about all of these adventures all day long, and we're going to do that right now. So one of the things that I want to sort of dig into here is a sort of a behind-the-scenes look at what went on when we were making this. Is that I have an outline that I gave all of the authors and gave to Liz, and after she picked this picture adventure, she read through the sort of more detailed outline, and then came back to me, in a week or so later, and she's like, "Okay, what about something crazier?" And I was like, all right, let's do something crazy, because to be harsh on myself, the outline was just like, it's a ruined world, and then you've got to go and do something in it. Good luck, go crazy.
And to be fair, I mean, your job is to come up with these broad scale outlines over and over and over again. So there's there's an amount to which you kind of need to lean on the freelancers to come with fresh ideas and fresh takes on what's going on.
Yeah, indeed. And you pulled through. It was basically, the basic plot is that you've got to go to this world to find the files of this professor who's researched the Forever Reliquary, which is a sort of a fantastical, possibly mythical place or thing. This professor from Ilimchuva knows about it, and maybe the swarm are there looking for the exact same information. So there is a bit of a hunt finding out what's going on. And I sort of wanted this note, and you can kind of see he's a little low down there, but our Belita on the front cover is sort of the leader of resistance on this dying world.
Right. So you've got a group of people who, in so much as the swarm devour everything they can get their hands on, a couple people are going to fall through the cracks and make their way out. And on this world, we've got this resistance movement of everyone who's managed to survive, who's banded together, doing as much as they can to ideally try and retake their planet from the swarm, now that the swarm has kind of like finished eating it and moved on. But the swarm's not quite gone. Yeah,
they're still there and present. They still quite haven't sucked the world dry. I should note that this particular planet started as a Sheeran colony back during their exodus from the swarm a couple hundred years before the present day. So it is set up that way, and it sort of attracted a lot of insectile races. So as we have a lot of bad bugs in this particular AP, we have a lot of good bugs.
We have a lot
too.
Of good bugs,
and I wanted to showcase how many sentient, friendly bugs that we have in our setting as possible, which is why I picked this Belita here for our main cover, and is the leader of what is called Clade Company, a sort of resistance movements, and that's a sort of another thing I wanted to evoke was the sort of underground, literally underground resistance movement on a world, and to sort of give PCs like, oh, there for the grace of all the gods go I. What if we don't take Susclon back, are we going to have to fight like these people, sort of rough and tumble, scrounging for any resources they can get to. But that's getting way off topic here, because Liz came in and was like, okay, we've got this part in the middle here where they've landed and they meet Clade Company, and they got to maybe get Clade Company's get on their good side. What can we do about that? And Liz came up with the Extractor. I changed it from drone to imago because I just like the word imago a lot. But the Extractor imago, which is this bloated tick-like huge building size swarm creature. So talk a little bit about what was going on in your brain. So we're at this point in the adventure where the PCs need to earn the trust of the Clade Company. And to some degree, they've kind of done so already because the Clade Company is like, hey, you're not Swarm. We can use all the help we can get. So it needed to be not just another, we need to earn the trust of this distrustful group. That's been done several times. So there needs to be something more there. And yeah, they could run into the destroyed city and recruit some kind of resources or defeat some kind of stronghold. But what if instead we take a journey inside a giant bug and blow it up from the inside? And so the imagos are these they're extractors. They're the machines that the swarm leaves behind after they've consumed everything that they can easily devour off of a world, to dig down into the planet itself and just suck out all of the resources it can get to. And so that's where you're talking about geothermal energy and rare minerals and any undersurface water that it can then take back to the larger swarm to be turned into whatever swarm components the swarm happens to need. So you've got this devastated planet, and here and there are these just huge, disgusting things they're like mosquito ticks. They've got these big, long noses, and they just dig into the ground, and they just suck it all up, and they store it inside themselves, and then when they're all done, the swarm comes and picks them up and leave. And so we put one of these on the edge of the city that the PCs need to be in, and this drone is digging down into the city, and it's destabilizing the part of the city that the university is in, that the PCs need to go into to discover the information about the Forever Reliquary. In fact, half of the university's campus has already collapsed because of this disturbance. And so we end up with a situation where it's not just another go get the allies to trust you or go get some random resources, but you're doing something that you need to do to be able to move on with your plot that's also going to benefit everyone involved and really reinforce that sense of teamwork that we want to see in this, particularly in this adventure path when you're up against such overwhelming odds. So I pitched this to Jason. I was like, it's a giant bug. You want to go inside a giant bug? I'm like, that's gross. It's disgusting. Yes, I want to do it.
And so we did it.
So we did that. How much research did you have to do on bug anatomy? I know I had to do a little bit after reading your turnover, but how much did you set? How many tabs did you have open looking at how do bugs breathe when they get that big?
How do bugs work? It was a lot. I've learned a lot about bug anatomy. Because if you're crawling around inside this bug, if you're building a starship or a building, you just put the rooms where you need them to be for, either logical use or adventure plot purposes. But inside a giant bug, there's this restriction of you're actually inside a creature that has to exist for another purpose. And so it's like, what organs do bugs actually have? What do they need to survive? How do those organs work? What do they look like? And how do we make that in a way that is on a scale big enough that the PCs can go climb around inside it. And so, I learned all about bugs' nervous systems and the fact that most bugs do have primitive lungs. Instead of breathing through nostrils, they have these little valves called spiracles that are usually along the side of their body, usually behind their front legs. that they use to breathe, and they have these little flap valves in them, just the same way our throats do, so that they can hold their breath if they need to. And so that ended up working really well for this piece of the adventure, because we've got this giant bug. You're literally just going in through its spherical valves. But if you make the bug mad, it says, "Oh, nope, nothing's getting in or out," and it shuts them off, and you're trapped inside this bug until you can fight your way back out.
Right. Yeah. It was just, I mean, because you made the bug so big, that's doors and hallways, right? Basically, it's a little adventure site that has other swarm inside of it, too, which was pretty cool that they were just in there sort of maintaining it like you would a building.
Right, like you would a building, because the swarm itself is sort of this hybrid between individual components and then larger sort of meta components that meet the needs that we would build machines for. So like a swarm starship is compiled out of swarm components. So are these extractor imagos, and they have other swarm in them to do necessary maintenance to keep it running smoothly and make sure it's doing what it's supposed to do.
And they, don't take kindly to you getting in there.
Oh, they sure don't.
Swimming around in all that lymph blood or whatever it is called.
It's pretty gross.
And then eventually just sort of like getting to the brain and just punching it until it dies.
Yeah.
And that does trigger a
pretty big chain reaction.
Pretty big chain reaction, which you have to then escape from.
Right.
Luckily, all the spiracles and all the door valves on the inside sort of
they flop open
because the thing is dying.
Unfortunately, it also flops all of the internal structure that's holding it in place, and all of these rare elements and chemicals that it's been pulling out of the planet sort of like merge up and become this enormous time bomb.
Right. So this becomes the point in our hilarious adventure where we do the running away from an exploding building scene. And as the thing is collapsing, you're able to sort of, if you get out in time, you basically drive away from a cool explosion and not looking back. And I had to illustrate that, of course. So we want to show that to you right now because it is a fantastic piece of art that we have. And you can see it just sort of, because it's, like geothermal gases and whatnot, it literally lights on fire. And you get in this Jeep that's being driven by some of the members of the Clay Company. You can see Altronus there, one of the backs as he's
steadfastly not looking
at that explosion because he's a cool guy. And it blows up, and that is able to give you enough of, not only does it help stabilize the region in the long term, but it also gives you sort of a distraction where all the other swarm come rushing out and be like, what the heck's going on out here?
What happened to our giant bug?
And that enables you to sort of move into a sort of a forward base in some ruins in the city where the university is. And that moves us on to basically part 3 of the adventure. And that sort of became it was just a neat scene that I'm so glad that you thought of that because I'm sure someone else would have thought of something else too maybe, but this was just the best part, because you get to be it I wanted to hit kind of every single kind of war trope as possible in this entire AP, and this is the cool behind enemy lines blowing stuff up trope that you need to have every once in a while.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I really love about adventure paths and working with so many different writers is that if I hadn't written that and someone else were writing this, they would have come up with something else that was equally cool.
Yeah.
And everyone is bringing something to the adventure they're writing, and it's you never really know what to expect until you're there and you're doing it.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's true. So in that part, we want to talk a little bit as well about the university. Because it is kind of becomes a different sneaking around, not necessarily sneaking around, but just sort of infiltrating this area, which is also still crawling with swarm, which is unusual.
It's unusual. Usually the swarm, I'm going to tell you about your own monsters here, but usually the swarm comes through a planet and eats everything there is to eat, and then it has no more business there. It moves on. And so the fact that the swarm are still here is weird. There's something going on, and the PCs don't really know why.
Yeah.
But the swarm are concentrated in the same area they're trying to go, so something about that is a there's some kind of a shared interest. There's some kind of overlap there, and the heroes are going to learn more about it as the adventure moves on and in future volumes of the Adventure Path.
Yeah, and they're looking for the professor's notes basically, and that time-honored tradition of going to university and trying to find a professor's notes. So talk a little bit about Zess University, which is the name of this particular institution, because you had some interesting additions, not necessarily additions, but sort of considerations when we wanted to talk about this university that's essentially on a Shirin planet.
Right. So Zess University is a Shirin university. It's one of the first centers of learning that the Shirin people established after they broke off from the swarm, made their exodus, and kind of started to settle places of their own. And so it's a couple hundred years old. But unlike most centers of learning in the Pact Worlds, it's not humanoid focused. It is insect focused. And so, the founding species of this university has 3 genders. A large percentage of the populations are trocs, which are large creatures instead of the typical medium creatures. And so I come from a little bit of a background in student affairs, working with university students. And so, of course, I immediately went to town and said, what is this university going to look like to meet the needs of this diverse and very different from human set of students? And so there's a lot of things like there's nowhere that you can't reach in the university by let me turn that around.
Sure.
Everywhere in the university you can get to without having to use stairs. Everywhere has hallways that easily accommodate large creatures, so all of the hallways are very spacious, very wide.
In stark contrast to a lot of Against the Aeon Throne, some of you might out there be playing knowing, especially with your uplifted bear characters, gotta squeeze in every 5-foot corridor that because the Aslanti don't care.
They don't care. It's a great comparison. The Aslanti are very, very human focused. But then even then I carried it forward into things like, there's you're drawing a map of somewhere made for people. You need to include your restrooms. And I'm thinking, what does a restroom look like for this? Well, the idea of binary gendered restrooms went out the window because like you're working with 3+ species, 3+ genders right off the bat with Shirins. And then it's sort of like, they're not going to have 8 restrooms for all of the genders you can come up with across these species. It's just gender neutral restrooms. They're all gender restrooms. And they range from your typical 5-foot stalls to slightly larger stalls to 20-foot square stalls, because if you're a Trox, you still need to use the restroom.
You gotta be able to move around in there.
Yeah, and so it was a lot of fun to sort of think about how this is going to manifest and what this is going to look like. So classrooms the same way. You have seating for medium characters. Right. You have seating spaces for larger students. Just by virtue of the fact that your students are going to be different.
So and the exploration of this, essentially, you start on the first floor of this one of the main buildings of the campus, half of which is destroyed. But you're basically in there looking for the professor's office, which is there, and going through a couple of the lecture halls and sort of noting what's going on, like seeing what the swarm are doing. And you get to see a little bit about like what they do with some of the resources that they compile, turning them into like these organic not exactly nutrient blocks,
like
but
resource bricks.
Just bricks that they take off and they're filled with some kind of DNA and take them off.
Easier to move them around when they're cubical than when they're piles of scrap.
But you also get to see the aftermath of what happened there, because this was a last stand of sorts for some of the people, at least the students and the faculty. So you'll see a little bit of barricades thrown up that were just ineffective, unfortunately. It's the planet was lost. You know what I mean?
It's grim. It's not a happy story.
Yeah. And of course none of that would be complete if we didn't have at least one undead encounter.
Of course.
So you get into the office and you're looking, and there's some swarm creatures there, but you're also you included a ghost.
Right.
A ghost of a Shirin professor, not the professor you're looking for, a different one, who, and here they are, very dapper, who I believe, I'm going to totally spoil this, starved to death, unfortunately, in a very grim end.
Locked themselves into their office to try and protect themselves against the swarm, and it was successful, but only for a couple of days.
Yeah, essentially not long. You can only last so long, and this one were there too long, and they just passed away. So at some point, you're going to have to deal with this particular ghost of a academic, and
when you do, compliment him on his clothes.
Yeah,
really, very clearly knows how to dress well.
One of those things is just like I like putting modern-ish, clothes on our alien species in a lot of ways. I just want to throw in like business suits, but make them but
they're a little bit more
different, and a little sharper in a lot of ways. This guy just got a little extra tail coat.
He's got some coattails thing. Yeah. It's a good fastening. It's a little bit asymmetrical without being too weird.
So there's the ghost, and there's some other undead that you might have to go to in the basement when you find out when you get to the professor's office that the computer has been mostly wiped, but there's a backup copy of his information down in the basement. So you head on the basement, which is also crawling with Swarm, of course.
And like, what are they doing here? Why is this? Why are they all over this place?
Exactly. And eventually get the information and get on out of there. And that's the adventure in a nutshell.
In a nutshell. And there's an interesting little bit of an encounter at the end where, of course, the Swarm cracks down on you and you've got to make your last stand.
Oh, yes, that's right. Then the forward base that you've made, they sort of note that you were there and you've got to basically help the Clade Company fight back against
and
the
get
Swarm,
out and get back to safety.
It's another big war moment.
Yeah.
And once you've sort of at least defeated them and you're able to get back to your ship and get on out and get the information to your own military. But one of those sort of things, so that's that in a nutshell. But we also like to talk some more behind the scenes stuff.
Yeah.
And one of the things that seemed to be popular last time when I talked to Jason Tundro about the whole Dawn of Flame AP was talking about maps. And we have some of your, here is one of your sketches that you sent me of the sort of opening area, and then sort of here's that forward base area.
Yeah.
And this is where the map on the left there is where you would land your ship, and then maybe you have your initial encounter with some Swarm where the Clade Company are watching, on the ridge going, oh, okay, you're against the Swarm.
Oh, hey, you're fighting these bug people, we fight these bug people, let's talk.
And this is where I decided that we would sort of introduce that troop subtype and have a troop encounter right here of dozens and dozens of dredgers, which the PCs have fought a little bit here, one or two at a time up to this
but
point.
now they're fighting big mobs of them.
Yeah, which gives you that definitely you're behind enemy lines kind of feel. And here is what happens sort of at the end of the adventure. This is the sort of ruins of the city where the Clade Company has set up a forward base for you to range off into the university. They're both lovely and we both use them both. But the tricky thing here is that this map on the left happens on like page 4 or 5, but then the map on the right, you kind of need about page 20 or so.
Yeah.
So it's one of the things I said, so one of the things we want to do is sort of put those closer to where they exist in the book.
And make it easier for the GMs so that the map is where you're going to be using it, so you're not flipping back and forth
so much. And all because we're sort of ranging over land, I thought it might be good to sort of give the GMs a sort of general idea of what the landscape around the city and where the Clade Company is. So I just sort of replaced that one on the right with moved that one on the right to a different map, and then replaced it with a sort of an overland map, and we can see what the final version ended up being. So you can see that on that left looks pretty much the same.
Much better art skills.
There's that too. We got Damien, of course, Damien Mammalidi doing all of our maps and doing obviously a wonderful job with it. And then you sort of take an overview, a larger aspect where you can see like how messed up this planet is, right?
Originally, the Ilim Chuva was a grassland planet. It was had very low tectonic activity, very slow plate shift, and a lot of just very flat plains, plenty of water. And so you're looking, think like the Midwestern prairies of the United States. And here's what we're looking at now that the Swarm has been here.
So we can see sort of like dots where you land and where you have your Clade Company mission, and then over there, sort of on the right, you can kind of see the Extractor Imago as a big white,
gross looking
thing, and then the city, which we didn't name now, but I'll name you now. It's Oods, 2 U's. I love that. 2 U's and DZ, which has that big crack down the middle, right? And wanted to sort of portray that it was on a city on a lake. At some point, and that water's all gone.
Yeah, the water's all gone, and the ground is cracking around it.
And some other things that you can notice on this map on the right-hand side, too, are these anthill-like structures that we sort of play up, that this is Swarm... Again, sort of buildings, but not quite buildings, just sort of layers.
Sort of like short-term Swarm domiciles.
Yeah, it's places for the Swarms to sort of where they also pull out. I wanted to kind of foreshadow these a little bit too, because we see them again a little bit more when you go into the Swarm Hivemind Mindscape in Adventure 5. But just sort of gives you an idea of like, oh, you're on here and you're going here, and a nice thing if you as a GM need some other overland encounters, you want to do that. You can get an idea of generally. And so, as you can tell, this being a city, those cracks are gigantic. They're just massive crevices and this world is a parched landscape of terribleness.
Right. Yeah, it's bad.
Yeah, it's not bad. It's not great. And then sort of we can take a look at the next sketch that you showed me, which is the basement part of the map of the university, and you've lovingly added all these weird organic walls that sort of cut the PCs off and make them go a certain way.
Yeah, this is a challenge I have with maps in general, is that I look at a building and I'm like, well, the efficient way to build this building would be perfectly regular symmetrical squares that are exactly the size you need. And that's actually not how most buildings end up getting built. I don't know why. But also, it doesn't make for a very fun or compelling adventure.
Sure, yeah.
And so whenever I do a map for an adventure, I'm kind of warring against myself of like, this would be the most efficient way for this to work. How is this actually going to work, given that we need to make it interesting for the players? Right. So this was kind of a compromise for me of like, this is an efficient building that has been made less efficient by the swarm.
Just for their own ineffable reasons. And basically, you've got to kind of go all through there. And this basement is not just like more classrooms or it's some storage and some IT and some what's it called? What would we call it? HVAC stuff.
Yeah,
right?
HVAC. It's like all of the mechanical room and server room and storage and janitorial space. Yeah, all of the stuff where students generally aren't going to go. Except I guess there is a lab down here.
And that's the sort of the part down there where there's 4 tables in the middle. There is a lab where there's some experiments were happening and some spooky stuff happens in there as well. But these walls, you get to put up, kind of making the PCs kind of travel along this way to sort of hit that server room, and then realize, the power needs to be turned on. Hit that one big room in the middle there. But we can see that sort of to the lower left hand was a sort of a university view, a higher level university.
Yeah, sort of like an aerial view of the campus.
It's unfortunately we had to kind of cut that to make room for the other map that we moved from here. So since this last stand takes place after you go into the basement, I kind of threw it onto this map, and we can see what the finished product looks like. As you can see, not much different here in terms of like where those walls are, and they look gross and weird. And then taking that ruined city area there and adding it to the lower left. Now, what happened here, unfortunately, is that as I was sort of noticing that and sort of making it feel like the maps were closer to where they were, I forgot that while this is a full-page map, the map that you're seeing here is not the same orientation that it is on a normal page in a book. So what ends up being is this thing gets rotated about 90 degrees clockwise, and that ruined city part ends up being in the upper left hand of the page of the book, which is kind of the first thing you see because of the way we read.
Oh, right. Yeah. And you don't actually use it till later.
And you don't technically use it till later. However, we sort of were able to kind of, I think Peyton's going to give this a little bit of a rotation. Yeah, this is what it ends up looking like in the book. And that forward base ends up being kind of like, just like, I kind of hand waved a little bit. You do go to you start the forward base. You sort of settle that forward base. Here it is. Here's what it looks like. Then you leave and go to the university and then come back. So not we all make mistakes, and we're trying our best, but hopefully it's not as difficult to flip back to this than to flipping back to the sort of beginning of the adventure.
Yeah, right. It's such a much smaller gap. I'm seeing one of our commenters here saying it's like level design in video games.
Yes, it is.
I actually did some reading on level design for video games. Just not that I've ever designed a video game, but as sort of like, oh wow, that's an interesting topic. I wonder what that's about. And so I sort of tucked some of those principles into the back of my head, thinking about lines of sight and elevation, opportunities for characters to use cover. Are there environmental pieces that they can pick up and throw at an enemy or use creatively, because this is an RPG and there's no limits on what you can do, and that has informed my map making a lot too. I think that's another thing that I'll say is that, like, if you're looking at those maps there, I'm not a great artist, and you don't have to be to make a good map that's usable, as long as it's clear what's going on. Lines and X's go a real long way.
Yeah, and we turn them over to our wonderful cartographer, and he's able to sort of make them shine, and take whatever you've got and sort of crank it up basically to the
they do
best degree.
Such phenomenal work. I have so much respect for our artists.
One of the other things too is to think about in terms of like, level design for video games are good, but then we've got to think about war. I always got to make sure that the fight that is supposed to happen in a room is big enough for that fight to actually happen in a way that's not too awkward for the GM to run. Basically.
Yeah.
You've got a huge creature in a room. Make sure that room is at least 50 by 50 or something, at least, something along those lines.
If it can't move, then it can't move, and the PCs can just pin it in place and punch it until it dies. That's boring.
Becomes a less of exciting fight. So when you're thinking about adventures at home and designing that sort of thing, thinking about maps and where PCs are going, how they can bypass things. If you've got a locked door and you really want them to go all the way around, well, make sure that it's so damn locked that no one can open it. None of your best entry. Or better, do something else. Yeah,
do something else, because if there's a locked door, you're inviting the characters to try and open it. So let them open it and find out why they don't want to go that way. A wall of lava will go real far.
Indeed. I like collapsing hallways a lot.
Yeah, I used a lot of those in this adventure. Sort of like, okay, yes, this is a whole university, but you're really exploring one wing of one academic building.
So there's clearly that there's more stuff elsewhere. It just is ruined and doesn't have what you need.
Yeah, it's not relevant, so it's not appearing in this film.
Exactly. So that's an adventure, but there's more to this book than that. We've got some creatures and the alien archives in the back. We've got an article that sort of details other survivors of the swarm, because the swarm is not while they're very powerful, they're not infallible. They'll have again, the Pact Worlds and the Veskarium fought them off a few decades past, but there's some other sort of systems out there that maybe haven't learned about, but more appropriate to you, Liz, is the article that describes the rest of the system where Ilum Chuva is, the Chuva system, and that was a sort of also a thing that I wanted to do with the naming of that. Is sort of like name the system one thing and then name one or two of the planets like that word with an extra
to it. Right.
tacked on. So the Chuva might mean like ghost or something like that, and Ilum Chuva is like fire ghost, or like whatever. It doesn't mean that, but like just sort of have that clear etymology, clear
there's a connection going on, that these are related in some way, but not so slavishly that they are all formulaic.
Yeah, exactly. So you wrote the basically the rest of the system, which consists of like six more
or so planets. Yeah. And that was another one where we ended up doing a lot of research just to see what to make sure that what we're creating is going to be believable.
Mm-hmm.
And so doing things like, okay, we've got the planet that's closest to the sun. What is this going to look like? Who's on this planet? What's it occupied by? What's going on there? And then there's your second planet out is really hot and Venus-like, so it's really swampy and gross. And for whatever reason, the swarm didn't stop there. They didn't strip that one dry. And then Ilum Chuva is our third one, and then you start getting further out and you get into some weird things. So I think there's a gas giant further out there that has some moons that people do moon things on. And then I think the last pair of planets in the system is a pair of dwarf planets that are orbiting each other while orbiting the sun, which makes for interesting astrophysics.
Yeah, weird, fun stuff like that. So that's all Huskworld. Check it out. It's got a lot of good stuff in there. And then, should mention too, the Codex of Worlds in the back goes back to the Suscalon system and talks about one of their gas giants, which has a creepy song thing happening on it.
Yeah, and also like speed racing gas giant races. It's great.
It's pretty awesome. So we're going to look down at questions that you've been posting and something from the forums as well, so we can ask about that sort of thing. From Oparl, how good is the treasure dispersed? It's one of the issues that I've seen in past APs and seen others complaining about. We try to our darndest to give the treasure out in such a way that it is you get the players get what they want, but we also try to do it so it's not so immersion breaking. You know what I mean? You're not going to necessarily find a whole bunch of stuff here on Ilum Chuva.
It was a challenge to do treasure here because just to make the game mechanically run, you do need the stuff to support you. But you're working on this dead world where all the resources have been stripped away. So there was a lot of creativity in how we pushed things around. So, allying with the Clade Company gives you access to some treasure early on. As you're poking around in the university, you can find some things. There's also a lot of things you can pull out of the university and take back to your forward base to make stuff with.
UPBs and whatnot.
UPBs and fire extinguishers.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's right. I forgot about that. There's a whole thing. There's like a kind of like a side quest going on about collecting fire extinguishers from the university.
Old white Dracus models.
And turning them into like ice and cryo weapons.
Sort of improvised grenades.
I forgot about that. That's great.
Yeah, I love fire extinguishers. I have loved them since we made the Starfinder core rulebook. I just think they're really funny.
Hey, you gotta have. I mean,
you've gotta have
why
them.
not have them? But in terms of like adventure design, we always have there's a goal. There's a monetary goal that we set for each adventure. This much treasure should be given out, and the way we design it, we try to give out twice as much treasure as you would need to go from wealth level 1 to wealth level 2 or whatever, or whatever the levels are for the adventure, just because PCs don't always find everything, and we don't know what your PCs are going to sell and what they're going to keep.
Right. So like, we want to give you a Solarian crystal in case you've got a Solarian in your game, but if you don't have any Solarians, that's worthless to you other than selling it for 10% of its cost.
So it's a tricky balancing act, and we try to sort of, if it's, looks good, it counts full value, et cetera, et cetera. We do some math here and there, and it's going to be different for every campaign. Unfortunately, we can't get everyone's treasure values in that bullseye range. So you sometimes gotta need to fully improvise. Throw UPBs out, because UPBs are good. They last forever, and PCs can make what they want.
Yeah. It's also in some ways it's kind of supports the veracity of the story, in that you're fighting a war, and particularly in this adventure, you're fighting a war on a destroyed planet. So you can't just go to the store and buy things. You need to make do with what you have. You need to be able to improvise. And so the treasure's there. We're supporting you, but the fact that you can't get exactly the new laser rifle you want for your character is kind of, I think, reinforces some of the themes that are going on throughout this entire campaign.
Yeah. Let's go for another question from Quincy, who is French. Hi, bonjour. And if there's a rule for Hivemind Management, especially for initiative and results for stuff like stealth and detection. Yes, all of our swarm have the Hivemind ability, which basically allows them to be aware of a threat if one of them is aware of a threat, they're all aware of a threat within a certain radius, but that information can sort of...
It can cascade down.
Yeah, cascade down. That radius isn't that big, I've noticed, which is something we sort of play with a little bit in later adventures. But again, since the swarm are massive, that cascade is almost guaranteed to happen. Now, the swarm on Susclon or the swarm on Ilum Chuva aren't going to know what's necessarily happening with each other until that information is translated from system to system, which is why the Hivemind paradigm is not perfect. You gotta send these other bits out there to go do a thing, but then you gotta wait for them to come back to get close enough so you know if they've succeeded or not.
Right, and even traditional communication through the drift is time delayed. Yeah, if you're using radio drift communications. Technological communications.
So, what was I gonna say there? That sort of Hivemind situation they also have also allows them to, if they're within a certain range of each other, they can re-roll a saving throw against a mind-affecting effect, so that they can basically sort of bulwark each other's minds using that Hivemind. So there's something in there.
I think there's another tool that's going to help, which is the troop subtype that gets introduced in here for some of these. So the dredgers that you were fighting earlier, now you're fighting them in big mobs. The troop rules help you run that so that you're not running 16 individual creatures as a GM, because we don't hate our GMs. We actually really like you.
Indeed.
And so that's going to make that easier and more streamlined for you to run.
Right. One big kind of monster. All right, moving on. Apparently you cosplayed Salita at PaizoCon. Now tell me who's Salita. I'm not sure who
Salita is one of the that's a good question. Salita is the new name taken by one of the venture captains from the Starfinder Society, who used to be known as Historia 7.
Oh, that makes sense that you would cosplay that.
It would.
That adventure,
so I wrote the adventure in which Historia took the name Salita and came to some really surprising conclusions about herself and her backstory. I'm not going to give any spoilers here, but if you play Starfinder Society, you should check it out because it's a great adventure. It's a lot of wacky mind madness. So at PaizoCon, I sort of said, okay, I want to put together a quick and easy costume. Androids are pretty easy. I have this relationship with this new android who has sweet art, so I got myself a blue wig and I had some blue body paint and put together the right clothes.
Awesome.
Am I putting together a character from Huskworld this year?
Yeah, that's the question at hand.
No, because as it turns out, cosplaying as a bug is real hard, and I don't have the skills for it.
Well, if someone out there can sort of put up a quick and easy design for cosplaying a bug.
A bug. Man, if you can pull it off, let me know. I want to see pictures.
I would love to see that. From Cosmic Crit. Hi, Patrick. Was it hard making up the Resistance Fighter NPCs, and are any based on real or fictional people?
That's a great question. It was not particularly hard for me. I love making characters. It's one of my favorite parts of RPGs is making a new character. And so getting to work on NPCs is like getting to make all kinds of characters. I didn't look to any real world inspiration. I enjoy the process and I don't struggle with ideas for characters, so I don't feel like I necessarily need that. But it also gives me a little bit of distance because then I'm not tying myself to, if I found this historical figure who I thought did a really cool thing and then modeled a character based on him, and then 6 months later find out that person was actually horrible.
Oh gosh.
Then I don't want to go there.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's a lot safer to stick with something that's new and fresh. And maybe there's assuredly parallels between characters I've created and real world characters. But this way I can say that they're completely independent. And,
sure. Yeah, and there's a fair number of them that you get to meet in the adventure, including the student that helps you make those fire extinguisher bombs.
Yep.
Who was basically like, oh yeah, I know, I used to go here and I know all about.
We used to play with these fire extinguishers all the time.
Yeah, so there's a that
you ever
was
want to
fun.
make it snow in the atrium?
And you've got some other cool sort of soldier types. Sheeran full of cybernetics.
Yeah, definitely a Sheeran resistance fighter, and then Hemasku, the Bolita leader of the Clade Company. You really get to personalize a lot of these people, so it's not just nameless faces, but like actual people that you're allying with and trying to work with.
Yeah. Cool. So another question for you, Liz.
All right.
What was the hardest part of describing a world that has already been eaten by the swarm?
Not using the same adjectives over and over.
That's fair.
I really, really enjoyed. Just like as soon as I read the one sentence description, I had the visual of what this world looked like, and so it was just really easy to break that out and expand on it and describe it. Everything from like, what does it look like when you try to go through the sewers of this world now to what happens if you go down those big cracks in the ground, and why is there acid? There's these big pools of acid on the surface because the whole ecosystem has been wrecked, and now acid rains regularly.
Yeah.
So it's that was really, I don't want to say fun. I guess it was fun, but kind of terrible.
Yeah.
The same way that like writing dark fantasy or horror can be really fun.
Yeah. To indulge that sort of stuff that we don't really want to think about in the real world, but getting it out of your system and putting it onto fictional paper. These people that don't really exist, except in your campaign. No, that's terrible. All right. So here's a question, a more slightly personal question. How big of a change has it been from offsite editorial staff to in-person senior editor to designer? So do you like just bubble up, squeal with delight, as basically asked here every time you think about this?
I do. I guess going through the question in order, it's been a huge change. I have lived in the Midwest my entire life, and moving to the Pacific Northwest has been just an enormous change. I'm very far from my family. I'm very far from the friend group that I've had for a very long time. Yeah. I've gone from being a homeowner back to living in an apartment. So it's been a huge change. But the fact that I've been working with the Paizo staff for almost 3 years full time before I moved out here made a really, really big difference. It made it so that I knew when I was coming here, I was coming to a place where I had a lot of friends and a lot of support. And that was a big difference. Paizonians are fantastic people. Moving from senior editor to designer has been a little surreal. I hadn't ever considered myself a potential designer until Stephen Radney McFarland announced he was leaving. And Logan Bonner, one of the existing designers, looked across the table at me and said, "You should apply for that, Liz." And I was like, Me?
That's sort of like Logan, I guess, might have been thinking back at his own. He started
came
off
out
as
of
an
editing
editor,
too.
so
Yeah,
he's like,
so did you.
That's true.
Editors are taking over Paizo,
which is just what it's perfect. Our plan is coming to fruition.
But then I sort of thought about it and I was like, I probably could do that. I've really, really enjoyed working on the Pathfinder 2nd edition rules set. I did a lot of work with that book. And one of the pieces I like most about it is getting in and getting up to my elbows in the rules material. And so I put my hat in the ring, and the people in charge of that decision decided I was the best person for the job, and I do kind of I get pretty excited every time I get to introduce myself as a designer now. It's part of it is just novelty, but also I'm excited about it. I like I like the work I'm doing.
Good, that's great. Good to hear already. So you're probably
it's only been a couple of weeks, so I haven't. It's very different work, and it's difficult work, but Indeed. It's so far so good.
I'm gonna read this one slowly as it's being typed out for me. Okay. In terms of challenges, again, talking about this adventure path, what do we think? I mean, you helped. I set up a Discord chat for all of my authors to sort of chat back and forth, and we sort of bounce some ideas around every once in a while. Any challenges for coming up with this adventure for you?
One of the biggest things that I found tricky was that I'm smack in the middle of this adventure path arc. Yeah. So there were 2 books before mine, and then there were 3 books coming after mine, and it was really tricky to hook what I was doing in from what had happened before. It's sort of like, okay, so like the PCs are starting where, and what do they know, and how did they find this out, and then sort of passing that forward, what do I need to make sure I'm providing to the next author so that she can pick up and move forward, knowing what the PCs know and keeping this plot thread. There's I think a challenge of adventure paths because it's 6 different authors that they can feel a little bit siloed. And so it's like, okay, for this volume, here's our goal and this is what we're doing. And we did that. And now we're in the second book and we're doing something else that we find out about at the beginning of the second book. Definitely
a challenge as the developer of the whole thing is to sort of seed all of that so that there were these occasional
sort of through lines
that could come up. It was a thing that there's eventual baddie, a big baddie that you fight at the end, as is always with an adventure path. But as sometimes is the rightfully criticized that you don't necessarily might not know about that person or creature. At the beginning, I tried to basically foreshadow that a little bit here and there,
a little bit. But part of the challenge of this AP is that you don't know what's coming. And so you can only foreshadow it so much.
Exactly. Just sort of showing off like, oh, you saw a big thing as you were blasting off from Suscalon. What was it?
What was that?
And then you kind of get it more a bit here. But I had to make sure that was at least picked up. There's at least one NPC in Volume 1 and 2 that if the PCs don't space him, shows up again in part 6.
He's probably going to get spaced.
He's so bad. He's basically our Dr. Smith of the from Lost in Space of the Adventure Path.
He's such a jerk. He came across the editor's chat and whoever was working on it was like, this guy is a jerk.
But stuff like that, is up to me to sort of make sure that those stitches don't show too much as much as possible. So we got to talk about like, let's talk a little bit about like I've heard about this forever reliquary. What is it? And maybe it can help us. It becomes in essence, this adventure is kind of a desperation move on part of the Suscalon Defense Force.
Right.
They don't know what's going on, whatever this might be, the forever reliquary, and they don't know if it's going to help them at all. But they got the PCs.
They've got the PCs, and they need to take every chance they can get that they can find something because the swarm is virtually unstoppable. I mean, they don't have the Pact Worlds and the Vescarium to join together to fight them off. They're on their own.
Yeah, they don't have that military might. So eventually, obviously, it's going to pay off because these things all have, for the most part, happy endings. But when you get up to this adventure, you might be, your players might be like, oh, what are we going to do? What are we going to do?
What are we going to do?
How do we take our planet back? Do we even bother trying? But since this, is a sort of, war focused, it is all about that. Starting off in that sort of low point where you feel like you're defeated and don't have anywhere to go to sort of gaining that hope ever so slowly.
Building it back up. Yeah. But so I said something a little bit earlier that might be worth following up on. What are the Pact Worlds doing in this adventure? Like the swarm has turned up and is eating planets. Like what's the reaction from the other parts of the galaxy?
It's one of those things that like the Suscalon system has a trading relationship with the Pact Worlds, and that's why. And the war has been going on for several months before the adventure starts. So that can be what they're doing. Could be what are your PCs? Who are your PCs? Where are they from? They should have a close tie to Susclon, but they might just be like, oh, I'm from the Pact Worlds originally, and I moved here to relax or whatever. But for the most part, they're like, it's Susclon hasn't reached out and asked for help so much. It happens so fairly quickly, and that the Pact Worlds and the Veskarium are dealing with their own stuff. It's kind of tough to send off a fleet to a whole military arm to just fight the swarm, which was hard enough as it is. So it's kind of just like,
well, and it's Susclon is not part of the Pact Worlds, and so it's sort of like beyond the purview of the Pact in some ways.
Yeah,
and you can't fight off every threat in the galaxy.
It's a little bit to sort of think about it. It's a little bit like World War II in that the U.S. was all the way over there. The war was happening in Europe. It was debated for a while, like years, right, of whether or not the U.S. should get involved in this, and the same with I think World War I and Britain. That's happening on the continent. That has nothing to do with us. So it hotly debated for a while. If the PCs didn't exist, if this adventure path didn't exist, it would probably be another 6 months to a year before the Pact World said, oh, we got to send military help to them or something, or at least accept all their refugees in. And
the swarm, finishes eating Susclon and accomplishes its goals in this adventure path and decides they're ready to move on. And hey, the Pact Worlds are right there, and we're mad at them for last time, so we're going to go back.
Yeah, all that. Yeah, so it becomes a situation where, again, as always, the PCs are the only hope. And have to do what they can do to win the day. There's no outside source is really going to save them, except for maybe a little god help here and there, but as most gods say, they help those who help themselves. To getting up to sort of wrapping this up, I think we're going to be seeing more of you this week.
Right, that's Liz? Right. This is the all me all week.
This is
plan.
all you all week. We're going to be on. You're going to be on Pathfinder Friday.
I'll be on Pathfinder Friday. So that'll be sort of, I guess, my debut as a designer. Sure. So we can chat a little bit. We'll be looking at the upcoming Game Mastery Guide for the Pathfinder Second Edition,
which is something you got to work on right away.
Yeah, it's actually I've done a lot of work on that book, so that'll be fun to talk a little bit. I'm also going to mention that we've got the Punch and Crawl coming up this afternoon. It's right after
stream. We're done here, and make sure to tune into that. So any final thoughts?
Oblivion Oath is tomorrow.
Oblivion Oath is tomorrow. I'm going to just say that I have been, Thursdays, Halloween falls on a Thursday this year. And I have been poking around costume shops for some reason, which I won't go into any more detail, but definitely keep an eye out on Oblivion Oath tomorrow. Well, not tomorrow, but in the coming weeks.
Halloween.
Tomorrow's not Halloween, thank goodness. But definitely for a fun surprise or two from at least me. And maybe some of the other.
I've heard some rumors. I think it's going to be pretty good.
Yeah. But in the meantime, we're going to be I'll go ahead and say it. We're going to be introducing a new character tomorrow on Oblivion Oath. Who will it be? Who will play that person? Find out.
It's not me.
It's not Liz. Unfortunately, it's not Liz. But be sure to get right now. Just sit on that edge of your seat and just stay there until noon tomorrow, when you can find out what's going on with our motley crew of cursed people and me, a guy who sells things. In terms of that, I was going to say I don't have any other final thoughts on this adventure.
Thanks so much for joining us this afternoon.
Yes, and thank you for tuning in. Thank you for all your questions, chat, and on the forums. I think next week's Starfinder Wednesday will not be me. I'm sorry. I gotta do other things every once in a while, unless someone else gets sick, and then of course I'll step in for that. But we'll be doing, I think, a quick look at the Witch Warper.
One of the new classes coming up.
Yeah, we'll do another build with the help of the chat. And until all of those other times, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you then. Bye-bye.